The goal of these protests, I would say we just want there to be equality for all students. I don't believe that your choice to be vaccinated or not should affect your rights and your privileges at school. Before the meeting, I was informed this was going to be a way for me to express the concern and the reason why we're doing these walkouts. And that they were supposed to be taking this to other people just to spread awareness and see what they could do as the board to help us, like as a minority, right? Because the board's job is to care for all minorities, regardless of their opinions. That's not their job, right? But what happened is they focused solely and like scrutinized over the wording that I used in one of the letters I sent out. One of the words they chose to focus on was the word segregation. They said that segregation is solely focused on like religious beliefs, the skin color, and like the culture that people have. And then they said that using the word segregation in these protests, even though we are a minority being segregated, set apart from everyone else, they said that it's demeaning to, like, for example, Black people and the racism that they've experienced. And they were really twisting the narrative that we were trying to set out. And it was a waste of my time for an hour. No students getting anything from it. And it was poor altogether. It just shows how, like, the lack of care that the board has for it.
Warning, censorship.
For Rebel News, I'm Tamara Ugolini, and I received an email through the Rebel News tips line, which you can email, by the way, at tips@rebelnews.com. Now, this particular lead came from a grade 10 student at Leamington District Secondary School in, of course, Leamington, Ontario. Before I met with Ryan Klassen, his mom agreed that it was okay for him to speak with me, as obviously he is a minor. But his age did not compromise the strong, principled stance that he is taking against the vaccine mandate coming down on him and his peers, and has resulted in him organizing weekly student walkout protests in defiance of the medical apartheid happening at his high school. Josh included pertinent people in the email that he sent out at the beginning of November. Included in there were his principal, Tony Omar, the mayor of Tecumseh, Gary McNamara, his director of education, Aaron Kelly, one other media, AM 800 News, which is a subset of iHeartRadio, and both his MPP, Rick Nichols, and MP, Dave Epp. Interestingly enough, Ryan didn't include the individual apparently responsible for this directive. And as per my conversation with him, that is because everyone deflects onto someone else. So before I give you an update as to how I discovered who this directive came from, let's hear from Josh Klassen about what he's doing and the landscape at his high school.
So far, there's been a couple of student-led walkouts. They've been like almost every other week consistently now for a couple of months. We've written letters to the board and just people who are higher up in our school system asking for just explanations on the matter and even like reasons why they're doing it, obviously, right? And we've got no response. So it's just been more the walkouts than anything else.
Mm-hmm. Tell us what the student-led walkouts look like from your perspective at school.
Well, we have, I would say, roughly 10 to 15% of the school population going out. And then what we do is we just hold signs off of the school grounds, so we don't disturb classes or anything like that. And then it's just a community of people. Like, not everybody isn't vaccinated or vaccinated. Like, this isn't pro or anti-vax movement. This is simply just students wanting to be able to participate in all school activities and school sports and have an equal playing field and like just to be able to do everything everyone else can do, right? And then we protest in front of the school with our signs and to oncoming traffic and stuff, just in hope that they spread the word to other people.
Mm-hmm. What has the feedback been like from faculty, your principal, within the school when you essentially walk out and you leave class? So what has that response been like?
Overall, it's been pretty like positive from the people in the school. There are some people who aren't as pro for it. Like, a lot of the students are very negative, I guess, towards the people and the students walking out. Some staff, I haven't personally experienced it, but other students have said like staff had made comments about being like very right leaning and like they use the term Trumpies and stuff like that, and kids walking out and all that, right? And then, but like on the first day we've been locked out by our vice principal when our students went out to protest, so they couldn't get back inside for their school stuff. They just had to wait for the buses to go.
What do some of these student-run programs look like now that there is a divide and essentially you're being segregated and left to, you can no longer engage in these extracurriculars?
Well, I would say the school sports teams are lacking quite a bit of talent because a lot of students who aren't vaccinated have been like student athletes still like all of the elementary years, right, and even the beginning of high school for a lot of them. And now that they've been stripped of the opportunity, school sports teams have lost a lot of potentially great athletes, and even like stuff like student parliament. I would say the school isn't as much affected by it as the students are, because that's a great way for students to apply for scholarships and stuff like that. And not having that under your, I would say under your belt as a student is quite a big setback.
Give us a quick recap of what it's like to be in high school right now.
The way our board has it set up is we have 2 periods a day. The first one is till like 11 o'clock or so. They're like almost 3-hour periods. And then you have a 40-minute lunch of just sitting with your, like, you can go aside for lunches and stuff right now, but then you can't eat in the building or anything like that. Masks always have to be on. And then sometimes they give you time to eat before a class. But then, like, you can't attend school sports or games even if you're not vaccinated or vaccinated. Like, they've just closed that down completely, which is a lot of school involvement, I would say. And then obviously we've missed out on a lot of opportunities for extracurriculars, which, even though personally I have sports outside of school, a lot of other students don't. And like school extracurriculars are the only way for them to be involved in stuff that doesn't cost them like a lot of money, right? It's really bad.
Yeah, and it's just reinforces that further narrative that this is a pandemic of the privileged. So if you have that extra financial backing to be able to go and do sport or extracurricular outside of school, then, you can maybe make it work. But like you said, the students who may be less fortunate, they're the ones that end up having to suffer or are more heavily coerced into this mandate because they just want to, be on student council or play rugby. Like, that's a very high, that's a big carrot to hold over someone's wave in front of their face. Ryan, now I originally was sent your story. You submitted it to our tips line. That's tips@rebelnews.com. And in there, you also included several members, elected members of your local municipality, your MPP, your MP, and then, of course, your principal and school board. What has happened? Has anything happened since you sent that email?
We only got one response, 2 responses, including Rebel News. One was from my principal, and we just talked in the morning, and he just recognized that we had the letter sent out, but then no one else responded to it. No one from the board, none of our MPs or anything like that. It was just sent and read, and that's it.
And the principal, he's not directly responsible for the imposition of this mandate. Is that correct?
Yeah, no, he has no say in any of the mandates that are going on in our school. It's just the higher ups in our board.
Mm-hmm. So this is a mandate being put out by the school board, not even the health unit necessarily. And then your principal is essentially, feels forced to fall in line with what the school board has done.
Yeah, he can't say anything. Like all staff members, because a lot of staff members do support the walkouts, but they can't come out and risk their job or anything like that because they can't obviously go against the board. So they're put in a pretty poor position as well.
Mm-hmm. And so much for being in a free and democratic society where you can't even voice an opinion out of fear of reprisal and job loss. Now, you did have a meeting, though, with a few members of the board and some other members of your school. Can you tell me about what happened there and who was all involved?
So we had my principal, my vice principal. One of the staff was a teacher, and then we had students from our student parliament. And then one other person from the higher ups in the board come down. Before the meeting, I was informed this was going to be a way for me to express the concern and the reason why we're doing these walkouts. And then they were supposed to be taking this to other people just to spread awareness and see what they could do as the board to help us, like as a minority, right? Because the board's job is to care for all minorities, regardless of their opinions. That's not their job, right? But what happened was they focused solely and like scrutinized over the wording that I used in one of the letters I sent out. One of the words they chose to focus on was the word segregation. They said that segregation is solely focused on like religious beliefs, the skin color, and the culture that people have. And then they said that using the word segregation in these protests, even though we are a minority being segregated, set apart from everyone else, they said that it's demeaning to, like, for example, Black people and the racism that they've experienced. And they were really twisting the narrative that we were trying to set out. And it was a waste of my time for an hour. No students gained anything from it. And it was poor altogether. It was just shows how, like, the lack of care that the board has for it.
Yeah, that is very frustrating. And of course, these are adults essentially telling you that you're misusing words that I'm sure you can look up in any dictionary for now until that definition is changed, which we've seen happen as well over the last year and a half. In closing, Ryan, do you have a message for other students or, anyone here, like these other media outlets that you've included in the email, your elected officials, what you'd like to see going forward?
The goal of these protests, I would say, we just want there to be equality for all students. I don't believe that your choice to be vaccinated or not should affect your rights and your privileges at school. Any students and kids who are, let's say, scared of the consequences of leaving class early to go and attend these protests, it's worth it, right? Because you're fighting for something that you believe in. And even if nothing comes out of these protests, at least we're getting our voices heard. And I do believe, like, that's the important of this, right? The board should be taking responsibility for what's happening and acting on it, but that's not going to happen unless we have a lot of people stand up for it.
It's clear that Josh has an initiative going, and it's reassuring, at least for me, to know that there are young men out there still upholding the right to bodily sovereignty and not caving to the extreme social and medical pressure to partake in a live action experiment. Now, I did reach out to Rick Nichols, and he voiced his displeasure with this mandate, but he noted that the lack of accountability goes all the way up, included in the Ontario legislature. That's been his experience so far. And I contacted Ryan's principal, Tony Omar, who was nice enough, and I appreciate him taking the time to take my call, but he deflected and told me essentially that his hands are tied and blamed Todd Allender, the superintendent of education, who oversees inter-school sports. He's apparently responsible for this mandate. I was looking around on the website, and I'm wondering if you have an actual policy or directive in place that delineates what exactly is required of the students to partake in extracurriculars.
This is from the health unit, and it's run through WEXA. WEXA is a committee of the boards. So all 4 school boards get together, and through the athletic association, we came up with, the boards came up with students had to be double vaccinated and have their QR code.
Okay, yeah, because I was on the health unit's website, and they state everywhere, as far as I can see, that the vaccinations are to be encouraged. And so I'm wondering on whose authority did they actually become mandated?
It came to us at WEXA. I don't know if you're asking me as the principal or because I'm also on WEXA. So to me, it's kind of blurred. That was no choice in the matter. So they had to be vaccinated. And then through discussion, we thought the best way to do that would be the Ontario QR codes because they have the scanner. It's much easier to verify.
Okay, and do you know if those QR codes will become obsolete if boosters become required?
No idea on that. That would have to come from the health unit to the boards to us, if that's the case. So that's the first time anyone's ever said that to me anyway.
Mm-hmm. There's a lot of rumblings that will be the next step. And so, if there's no clear directive, actually, perhaps I could send you an email, and if you don't mind pointing me in the direction of the formal policy or directive that's been put in place, maybe there's a more clear definition there of fully vaccinated and whether or not that's a fluid definition.
Yeah, do you mean the board policy?
Well, as far as I can tell, there is no policy, so that's what I'm calling to inquire about.
Yeah, that would be, it's all under Superintendent Todd Awander. He's the one who's our lead on this and talking to the health unit. So really from him. I don't get to make that decision, by the way. That's coming from him and whoever else discusses it at the board level to us as principals.
But when I couldn't reach Todd on his phone, I drafted an email. And here is what I asked. Number 1, how did Mr. Allender decide that declaring vaccination status to partake in extracurriculars would be mandatory instead of encouraged? In that question, I linked directly to the Ontario government's health and safety operational guidance document that clearly states that they encourage school boards to work with local public health units to reach out to families and promote vaccination. Does promote mean mandate? I mean, what gives? Next question. What is the goal of this directive if COVID biologics have been shown in real time to not prevent transmission or infection? And lastly, after that meeting was facilitated between Josh and the school board, how was it determined that students who are feeling left out and robbed of opportunity will continue to have a safe, caring, and accepting school environment as per the Safe Schools policy? And again, I provide a link there to the school board's own policy, which oddly enough also makes mention that having this environment maximizes students' learning potential. I included in that email Todd Allender, superintendent, Josh Canty, school board trustee Amy Olmstead, and director of education Aaron Kelly. None had the audacity to respond by my deadline. So are we still hindering students' learning potential nearly 2 years into an alleged global pandemic that isn't actually an emergency for their age demographic? And still, this heavy-handed enforcement of nonsensical policy with no grit to justify it just continued knee-jerk reactions when our future, they're the ones who will suffer the most. For Rebel News, I'm Tamara Ugolini. Have you had enough of these vaccine passports? I mean, I was done with them before they even got started. And if you want to help us fight them, then please head over to our special campaign at fightvaccinepassports.com. You can support our legal crowdfunding there because all of your donations go directly to the Canadian charity called the Democracy Fund. And they help individuals who have contacted us at Rebel News to litigate on their behalf at no charge to them. Head over to fightvaccinepassports.com and check it out.